Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. My name is Steve Fielding. All the stories are taken from my 3-volume series of books, The Hangman's Record, covering every execution in Great Britain and Ireland between 1868 and 1964. Copies of these and many of my other titles can be obtained through my website, stevefielding.com. If you enjoy the video, can you please press like and subscribe to the channel? And if you can spare £1 or £2 to help it to continue to grow by clicking the thanks button on the YouTube video or the link paypal.me/thehangmansrecord, that will be greatly appreciated. And, as always, use the comments below for your thoughts on the case, whether justice was seen to be done, and suggestions for future episodes in this series. Crimes of passion are amongst the most common in the pages of the Hangman's Record. Today's tale, from the late summer of 1915, is one such example. King George V is on the throne, with Herbert Asquith's Liberal Party in government until May, when a coalition government is formed. In America, 28th President Woodrow Wilson is 2 years into his 8 years in the White House. The main headlines from the year are mostly to do with the Great War, which had begun in the August of the previous year. It was a year that was to see the first Zeppelin bomb raids, initially on towns on the East Coast, before attacking London later in the spring. In Europe, the Second Battle of Ypres sees the first use of poison gas by the German army, killing 6,000 Allied troops in the first 10 minutes. A few months later, Britain uses the same gas at the Battle of Loos, which would see over 50,000 casualties before the Allies are forced to retreat 3 days later. At sea, the liner Lusitania is sunk off the coast of Ireland, with the loss of over 1,000 souls, including many Americans, fueling the US public to support the war against Germany and leading to their participation 2 years later. 1915 would see the worst rail disaster in British history, when 3 trains were involved in a collision at Quintin's Hill in Dumfriesshire, killing over 200, mostly soldiers of the Royal Scots from Edinburgh, on the way to fight in Gallipoli. Away from the war, Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks are the biggest film stars, while in the music hall of the UK, Mary Lloyd, Vesta Tilley and Harry Lauder are amongst the most popular. Hit songs that year were music hall classics like A Little Bit of Cucumber, A Little Bit of What You Fancy Does You Good, and patriotic songs like Keep the Home Fires Burning, Pack Up Your Troubles in Your Old Kit Bag, Goodbye Ye, and It's a Long Way to Tipperary, written 3 years earlier but now popular with soldiers fighting in Europe. And, in the north of England, a spurned lover takes his revenge in a brutal and callous manner, leading to a date with the hangman on a cold winter morning. Railwayman John James Thornley had been courting Frances Johnson, a ring spinner in a cotton mill at Macclesfield, Cheshire in the northwest of England, since the spring of 1913. The couple had been together for over 2.5 years and had become engaged at the outbreak of the war. It was Frances's second engagement, and in the summer of 1915, Frances, as she'd done with her previous fiancé, called a halt to the relationship and handed back the engagement ring. At 26 years old and some 2 years older than his fiancée, Joe Thornley, as he was known to his friends and family, was working as a lampman and shunter on the North Staffordshire and Great Central Railway based at Macclesfield's Hibble Road station. Although many men his age had been called up into the army and were enduring the horrors of the war in France, Thornley's work on the railway was classed as a reserved occupation, and he had thus far avoided conscription. The breakup stemmed from the fact that both were of different temperaments, and as the relationship developed, Frances began to realise they had little in common and not much prospect of a happy future together. Most significantly was the fact Thornley had developed a jealous streak and was constantly accusing her of being too familiar with other men, especially those she worked with in the cotton mill. Frances, who had 2 older brothers away in active service, was bright and vivacious, and lived at home with her parents at 142 Davenport Street, while Thornley, more stern and serious, lived alone on nearby Fountain Street. Thornley had moved into his new home after falling out with his widowed mother and seemed to pay no heed to the breakup, and would often turn up uninvited at Francis's home, close to the main Macclesfield railway station where her father James worked as a foreman porter. These visits usually ended in a quarrel when she repeatedly rejected his request to rekindle the romance. Finally, she confided in her father of his behaviour towards her, and James Johnson, who had never been particularly enamoured with Thornley, warned him to stay away. The unwelcome attention hadn't initially caused Francis much distress, and, as there was nothing in his manner other than raised words to suggest anything unpleasant, she merely saw him as just a pest. But over the next few weeks, she took to avoiding him in the streets if their paths crossed. This only made Thornley more angry and resentful. That September, her parents went on their annual late summer holiday to Cleethorpes. In previous years, Francis had accompanied them, but this year, due to the war work and demands at Lower Hayes Cotton Mill, holiday leave was cancelled and she was unable to take time off. As a result, she would be alone at the house for a week, and so, for company, Francis invited her next-door neighbour, 17-year-old May Warren, to stay with her. For the first 2 nights, the girls had shared her parents' large double bed, and spent the early hours chatting away until sleep prevailed. Both had to rise early for work on the following mornings, and after 2 sleepless nights, it was decided that for the rest of the week they would sleep in separate rooms to enable each to get a good night's rest. On Thursday night, knowing that Francis's parents were away on holiday, Thornley called her to her house and entered uninvited. A quarrel broke out and he grabbed Francis by the hair and attempted to strangle her. Her cries and screaming caused him to stop, and Thornley then left and made his way home. May Warren called around a short time later and, seeing Francis in distress, took her back to her parents' house, where she agreed to stay until her parents returned from their holiday. Then she changed her mind and returned home. It was to be a fateful decision. On Friday evening, the 18th of September, the 2 girls decided to visit the local Picture Palace on Duke Street, where they chanced upon Thornley as they were queuing to enter. The meeting was entirely coincidental, but when he tried to make conversation with them, mindful of the events of the previous evening, Francis was brusque with him, and the 2 made it clear they didn't want his attention. Nevertheless, Thornley followed them into the theatre, but took a seat some distance away and made no further contact with them. Returning home in the early hours, Francis locked all the doors, prepared a fire and breakfast for the morning, and set the alarm clock for 4:30. What transpired during the night was later recalled by Miss Warren. I was awoken at about 2:30 in the morning, she recalled. I heard a bang in the yard. My first thoughts were that someone was trying to break in, so I listened quietly. Next, I heard a rattle of a window as though someone had succeeded in forcing it, and then my alarm increased as I heard footsteps inside the house. My fears were confirmed when I heard someone knock against the table in the darkness. Not a sound up to this time had come from the bedroom in which Francis lay. When I heard the handle of the kitchen door being lifted, I tried to muster up my courage to go and warn Francis. Springing out of my bed, I got halfway along the landing and there was a crash, and glued to the spot for a few seconds with fear, I could make out a dark form of a man on the stairs. She then said she heard a scream from Francis's room, and then silence. When the alarm clock rang in the morning and it wasn't switched off, she feared something was wrong and roused her brother-in-law Joseph Barber. Barber entered the house, took one look into the bedroom, and then hurried off to inform the police of his grim discovery. I removed a pillow from her face and saw deep wounds like stab wounds in her throat. Her face was also cut and there was blood on her cheeks and arms, he told the startled desk sergeant. Police officers arrived at the house with a local doctor, Herbert Marshall, and found a shoemaker's knife at the scene. It had been placed in Francis's left hand as if to suggest she had taken her own life. But it was clear from the medical examination that it had been placed there after rigor mortis had begun to set in, clearly ruling out any possibility of suicide. Further supporting this was a letter found on a downstairs table, the contents of which pointed to the involvement of Joe Thornley. The Chief Constable of Macclesfield, Henry Sheasby, organised an immediate search for Thornley, and information from a John Hatton caused them to concentrate their search on an area of the canal by the Buxton Road Bridge. Hatton, the licensee of the Puss in Boots Inn, had seen a man behaving strangely as he looked out of his bedroom window around 5 o'clock that Saturday morning. The man removed his hat, coat, waistcoat and boots and then swam across the canal and back. Hatton then hasted to the nearby home of Inspector Sproson, who was soon joined on the canal bank by Chief Constable Sheasby and a number of officers. Another who had witnessed the strange goings-on was boatman James Hall, who had seen a man on the towpath between the Buxton Road and Herdsfield Road bridges. As it was still dark, Hall could not make out the man's face clearly, but said he had made off in the direction of Herdsfield. Later that morning the canal was dragged, with nothing untoward being found, so inquiries continued and a description of the wanted man was circulated in the immediate and nearby areas. Details of his build and complexion were given, but the most identifiable thing about Thornley were his numerous tattoos. His upper body was covered in a myriad of colourful designs, including a large cross on his chest. Hunger eventually drove Joe Thornley from his hideout in the dense woodland at Higher Poynton, and on Sunday morning at 10:30 he called at nearby Hag Farm asking for food and drink. The owner, warned to be on the lookout for the wanted man, suspected that the caller may be Thornley and sent one of the farmhands off on his bicycle to fetch the police. Officers hurried to the farm, and although Thornley had now left, he was spotted leaning against a bridge a short distance away. He denied his name was Joe Thornley, so the officer, mindful of the large tattoo on his chest, asked him to open his shirt. He was then placed under arrest. Thornley was taken to Macclesfield police station, where on the following day he appeared at the adjacent Borough Magistrates Court, charged with the murder of Francis Johnson, and remanded in custody to appear at the next sitting of the Chester Assizes. John James Thornley's trial took place at Chester Assizes on Wednesday the 27th of October before Mr Justice Coleridge. On the advice of his counsel, Mr Trevor Lloyd KC, Thornley pleaded not guilty to the charge. Prosecuting counsel, Mr R.B. Banks, produced several witnesses to Thornley's strange behaviour, and damning evidence was supplied by one Lily Hemshaw, the cashier at the local picture palace. She knew both Thornley and the deceased well, and they had visited the palace together on many occasions. On Thursday the 16th of September, the day before the murder, she had seen Francis in a dishevelled state, and inquired of Thornley what had happened. He said he was angry because Francis had pawned the engagement ring he had given her. "I feel like doing her in," he told the cashier. "I will swing for her." Further evidence was supplied by Emma Wrigley, a widow of Hayes Yard, King Street, Macclesfield. On the 17th of September, Thornley visited her at home with a framed photograph of himself, which he asked her to keep. He was annoyed, he told her, as he had planned to go to the theatre, but that plaguey little thing had got there first. He was clearly referring to Francis, and Mrs Wrigley told him not to worry, as there would be plenty of other seats in the theatre. He then added that he had been round to Francis's house on the previous evening, and given Francis what her father daren't do. May Warren testified that Thornley had attempted to strangle Francis on that Thursday evening, which had resulted in May Warren staying over again on the night of the murder, when Francis rejected her father's offer to stay next door. The prosecution then produced two letters. One, found at the scene of the murder, was addressed to Francis's parents. It read, "Dear Ma and Pa, I told you I would have killed or cured Francis, and I have done it. I hope you will forgive me for breaking God's holy law." The second, addressed to Mrs Emma Wrigley, had been drawn to the attention of the police by William Mullins, a baker with premises on Buxton Road. Giving evidence, he recalled, "I was working in the bakehouse at 11 o'clock on Friday night, the 17th of September. Thornley came in for a chat and left a few minutes later. He then came back in around 3 o'clock on Saturday morning, and I asked him where on earth he was going at that time. He said he had a bit of extra work to do, he was going to do it. He gave me a letter addressed to Mrs. Wrigley and asked me to post it for him. I agreed to do so and he left. He was perfectly rational at all time. This letter was read out in court. Dear Ma, I went to see Frances, but she was just in the same mind. So, if you don't see me before Saturday, pray to God to forgive me for what I have done. Go up to Calamine Street to my funeral, as I want to be buried in Hurtsfield Church. God help us both and forgive us for what we have done. I told you I've done my best, and now I have done my worst. Jack J. Thornley. Evidence was then heard from Dr. George Griffiths, the prison doctor of Walton Jail, and Dr. Norwood East, the doctor at Manchester Strangeways, where Thornley had initially been held on remand. Both had observed Thornley at length, and neither stated they had seen any signs of insanity or homicidal mania in the prisoner, nor was there anything written in the letters nor the way he committed the murder to suggest insanity. Both spoke from vast experience of previous murderers and insanity. Mr. Trevor Lloyd KC, opening for the defence, wisely acknowledged the amount of evidence against the prisoner and said he declined to insult their intelligence and the common sense of the jury with regard to the fact that Thornley had actually killed Francis Johnson. The issue now, he stated, was whether or not his client was insane at the time of the murder. With this in mind, he called his first witness. Mrs. Elizabeth Thornley of 5 Calamine Street, mother of the accused, testified that her son had had fits as a child. His brother had been killed 3 months before, and he had become very passionate and hasty. His outbursts would last a few minutes and he would then be normal again. His continuing strange behaviour caused her to ask him to leave the house that summer. Closing her testimony, she added that Thornley's grandfather and 2 other relatives had been in an asylum. His behaviour had worsened since the break-up with Francis. 2 colleagues from the Hibble Road railway station stated that Thornley's behaviour had often been eccentric, and they had previously questioned if he was altogether there. Summarising for the defence, Mr. Lloyd asserted, surely a sane man would not have behaved as Thornley did. If he was merely a cold-blooded killer, would he have gone around telling people he was going to swing for Francis? Would someone in his right mind have written the letters producing evidence which could only help to put the rope around his neck? His behaviour at the canal was not that of a sane person, having committed this awful murder. Could it not be that he intended to take his own life? People do not go to a canal with the intention of killing themselves. Mr. Lloyd closed by inviting the jury to consider the whole history of the case and decide whether they thought Thornley was in full possession of his faculties or insane at the time of the murder. This question was reiterated by Mr. Justice Coleridge in the summing up. He advised the jury to take into account evidence of the prisoner's behaviour and family history, as it was a known medical fact that insanity could run in the family. Inability to control feelings or passion, however, was not an adequate reason to exonerate Thornley. By that, they would be saying that a man in a towering temper could not be excused of a crime by reason of his mood. Lord Coleridge also reminded them that the murder weapon had been placed in Francis's left hand. Was this done to suggest that Francis's wounds were self-inflicted? Medical evidence had already ruled out this possibility, so was it an attempt by Thornley to shift the blame elsewhere? That would give a sure guide as to whether he knew right from wrong. With this last point fresh in their minds, the jury retired to consider a verdict. They needed just 15 minutes to find that Thornley guilty as charged. Mr. Justice Coleridge then sentenced him to death. The whole proceedings had taken just 6 hours. Under normal circumstances, John Thornley's execution would have taken place at Knutsford Jail, which had taken over from Chester Castle as the execution site for murders committed in Cheshire many years earlier. However, in the summer of 1915, Knutsford Jail had been taken over by the military, and the prisoner was therefore returned to Liverpool Walton Jail, where he had been held prior to his trial. The execution was not without incident. Sharing the gallows with the Macclesfield murderer was a young American Negro sailor named young Hill, who had cut the throat of a fellow sailor while following a quarrel over drinking water given to a sick comrade. Hill had been arrested at Liverpool's Canada dock. With his appeal dismissed, Thornley awaited his execution stoically, and as the fateful day drew closer, he even told his guards that he knew the hangman, John Ellis. "I saw him in Manchester once. I expect he'll be the one to do me in." At 9 o'clock on a cold Tuesday morning, the 1st of December 1915, the two condemned men were led to the gallows. As Ellis and his assistant, William Willis, strapped Thornley's wrists, they couldn't fail to see the tattoo on his left arm. It was a large red heart with the name Francis boldly picked out above it. Thornley took his place on the drop. With a noose around his neck, he waited while Hill was made ready. The two hangmen led the American, who Willis noted was a jet-black Creole, towards the drop, and he cried out, thank God," twice as he slowly shuffled the final few yards. As Ellis adjusted the rope, Hill let out a fearful scream and began pleading to be spared, before slumping back in a faint and had to be supported by the two warders standing on the planks across the trapdoors. Unable to see what was happening, Thornley coolly stood firm until Ellis pushed a lever, the trapdoors crashed down, and Francis Johnson was avenged. John James Thornley never tried to deny his crime, and, as he wrote in the notes left at the scene, he was fully prepared to face the consequences of his actions. A sad and all too common crime of a lover spurned resorting to murdering the thing he loved because she had ended their relationship. You'll be watching another tale from the Hangman's Record. Until the next time, thank you and goodbye.